What will become of Fort Monmouth once the Army closes it? Find out next on Outlook Monmouth. Welcome to Outlook Monmouth. I'm Armen McOmber, your host. Since the early 20th century, Fort Monmouth has been a leader in military intelligence and communication technologies. The fort was instrumental in America's World War II effort and has supported our armed forces in every campaign since that time. Despite staunch local opposition, the Department of Defense slated the fort for closure by September of 2011. In 2006, Governor John Corzine signed the Fort Monmouth Economic Revitalization Act into law. The act established the Fort Monmouth Economic Revitalization Planning Authority, a group of elected officials and citizens responsible for planning and managing redevelopment of the fort. We're fortunate to have with us today two representatives from the Planning Authority. Frank Cosentino serves as the authority's executive director, and Rick Harrison serves as deputy director. Welcome to Outlook Monmouth, and thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Mr. Cosentino, let me start with you. Maybe you could just provide a brief history of the fort, where it's located, what purposes it's served over the years,
Sure.
Just for people that aren't aware of it.
Well, as most of the folks watching know, it's located in central Monmouth County, approximately a mile from the ocean, off of Route 35. And for 90 years, it's served the purpose of the Army in both the Signal Corps and other support operations for the warfighter in wars from World War I right on through to current day.
And what still exists at Fort Monmouth at this time?
Well, the efforts at Fort Monmouth are, again, directly in support of the warfighter in terms of their communications support and multimedia operations.
Mr. Harrison, there's still, for those of us who live in Monmouth County, I think we're aware of the BRAC process and the closing of the fort, but you still occasionally hear something out there that, the fort's not going to close, they're going to reverse their decision. Maybe it's just optimism on some people's part. But, is there any truth to those rumors?
Well, the fact that there are the rumors is true. However, there's a federal law that mandates that the fort close by September 2011. I would say, personally, it's very unlikely that could be reversed. It would involve both houses of Congress, the White House, and would also mandate the reversal of all of the other closures and growth projects that are part of that BRAC round. BRAC was not just about closure, it was about consolidation and realignment. And in fact, right here in New Jersey, we're experiencing some growth with the creation of the Tri-Base down in South Jersey.
And the Tri-Base is Fort Dix,
McGuire and Lakehurst Naval Air Station.
So that's actually growing?
That's actually growing.
Okay. Mr. Cosentino, in terms of the creation of, and I'll call it the authority rather than FMERPA,
Please.
But in terms of its creation, what's the role of FMERPA or the authority?
We were tasked with the responsibility of addressing the economic revitalization. The impact in this region is yet to be felt. So far, I think we've experienced the emotional impact of the loss of Fort Monmouth. I believe, in my opinion, the fiscal and financial impact is yet to be felt.
Well, what kind of impact are we talking about?
Well, the fort itself contributes $165 million to the revenues of the state and $2.4 billion to general revenues as well. The task that we had at hand was to come up with a plan which would allow the redevelopment and reuse of this 1,128 acres of property, and do it in a fashion that would allow, over a 20-year planning period, a steady growth of both commercial, but housing and retail properties as well. But our primary objective was to create a plan that would allow the creation of new jobs for this area. We are going to lose 5,600 direct jobs on the fort, and thousands of other support jobs from contractors who work in and around the fort.
Who are the members of the authority?
Well, the members of the authority, as was constituted by the legislation, were the 4 elected officials, the 3 mayors of the affected communities, those being Tinton Falls, Eatontown, and Oceanport, so they're mayors, as well as a representative from the freeholders, Monmouth County freeholders, that being freeholder Bury. In addition to that, there were four selected citizens from the area and a ninth designee by the governor. So therefore, there were 9 voting members and 1 representative from Department of Defense who happened to be the garrison commander.
In terms of input, Mr. Harrison, from the surrounding communities, what did the authority undertake to make sure that people are heard and there's input from the affected communities, which I believe are in this case are Tinton Falls, Eatontown, and Oceanport? Is that correct?
Correct. Tremendous amount of outreach. We went through what they call a visioning process, where we held public hearings with a consultant who is an expert in the visioning process. And we actually had people drawing pictures on maps from all 3 communities. We also had a public hearing over at the Pollock Auditorium, Monmouth University. At every stage of our planning efforts, we held public hearings. And at the end of our planning process, our plan was required by state statute to be submitted to the 3 host communities for a 45-day review period. And then our final application to HUD, which included the redevelopment plan and our homeless submission, we had a public hearing in Tinton Falls, which lasted over 3 hours. These hearings, we all had verbatim transcripts made of those hearings, and those transcripts were included in our submittal to the federal government. So there's a tremendous amount of outreach to the communities.
And before we get to the plan and the approval process of the plan, what were some of the concerns, Mr. Cosentino, that citizens expressed or communities expressed about the future of Fort Monmouth and the plan that you're creating?
Well, I think that the primary concern was not knowing what would happen. Obviously, they were concerned that a developer would come in and just build from one end to the other.
And that's not going to happen.
That is not going to happen. That is correct. And I think the plan reflects that fact, that it will not happen that way. I believe that there were concerns about what would happen with all of the open space there, and how would we replace the jobs? I mean, again, it goes back to the focus. There are people who are moving with the mission down to Aberdeen and the other locations, but there will be a lot of people who will be staying here that will lose their jobs. And so they were very, very concerned about what would we be doing to revitalize the job market. And certainly in the latter stages, most recently, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the economic impact, the general economic impact, has had even a greater measure of concern for people.
You said before the impact so far has been mostly emotional, but
That's
we're going
right.
to start to feel it relatively soon. And when do you think we'll reach sort of a critical mass of the jobs either being lost or moving? I mean, when will Monmouth County really start to experience what Fort Monmouth's closing means?
We've established a very close working relationship with the garrison and the mission people. And based on that, those discussions, I believe we're going to see the first waves, considerable waves of people moving down to Aberdeen, probably mid-2010. And it will be increasing in intensity of movement through the latter stages of 2010 into early 2011. And I think that's when you'll see the major impact take place.
And you said how many jobs approximately?
Well, there are 5,600, approximately 5,600 jobs that are direct jobs on the fort, and then there are thousands, literally, depends on what stage certain projects are at, but there are literally thousands of contractor jobs that are impacted potentially.
Mr. Harrison, we'll get into the plan soon because I think that's probably the most critical part. But in terms of the approval of the plan, it's now, as I understand it, been approved by all of the municipalities. all the planning boards of the affected municipalities, but where does the plan stand now in the approval process?
Well, first of all, it's been reviewed by the municipalities, but we had to accept their comments, but we didn't necessarily have to incorporate their comments into
Did you
the plan.
incorporate their comments?
Yes, we did.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
With almost little exception, we incorporated the comments. So in effect, they really didn't get to approve the plan. But in their role sitting on our authorities board, they did get to approve the plan. The plan was approved.
So the mayors of all three towns were on.
The mayors of all three towns. So the authority approved the plan in September 2008. It was submitted to HUD and the Department of Defense. HUD is the only organization that can actually reject or approve our submission.
Now, when you say HUD, you mean the Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Housing and Urban Development. BRAC law requires that we consider the needs of the homeless with the redevelopment of any surplus federal property. And it's quite a complex process that's dictated by this law that we had to go through to screen requests from homeless providers where they would ask for accommodations, land and buildings currently existing on Fort Monmouth to accommodate the needs of the homeless. And in our case, the area of catchment that we had to consider was Monmouth County. So we were looking at the homeless needs in Monmouth County and how we could best accommodate those needs through the redevelopment of the fort.
And that's required by the BRAC law?
That's required by BRAC law.
Okay,
yes.
And has HUD approved that part of the plan?
We understand that HUD is actively reviewing our submission at this time. Our submission is about 1,100 pages. It's a document about this thick. It contains verification of the needs and priorities of the homeless in the county, documentation of the entire process that we went through, including the transcripts of the public hearings, legally binding agreements for those accommodations that we actually decided to go forward with. And the most critical part of our homeless submission that HUD looks at is our balance statement, how we appropriately balanced the needs of the homeless with the economic redevelopment needs of the communities. And that's what they're going to focus on.
Mr. Cosentino, once HUD presumably approves it, or if they make recommendations or changes and then it's approved, what's the next step for the plan?
Well, then, once we've received the approval from HUD, then we are free to sit down and begin our negotiations with Department of Defense on the property itself. There has been a position taken early on in this BRAC round that the Department of Defense wanted fair market value for any of the closure properties. Well, of course, fair market value is an interpretive statement, as we all know, in real estate. And certainly, fair market value in whomever's mind has changed dramatically with this change in the economy. So we are looking forward to finalizing our strategy with regard to the disposition of the property. There are a number of different approaches that may be taken, and we're looking at every one of these possibilities.
Okay. We're going to go to a short break. Please stay with us for more about redevelopment of Fort Monmouth here on Outlook Monmouth.
Hello, my name is Max Weinberg, and I'm a musician, but most importantly, I'm a parent. I'd like to speak to you today about a subject that's very important to me, and I know, of course, that it's important to you, our children. To best understand the challenges that our children face every day, well, I'm going to ask you to go back in time and remember the challenges that you faced as a child. How did you handle the bully in the locker room? How did you handle being left out of the group in the cafeteria? Do you remember who first tried to get you to smoke a cigarette, or try a beer, or a joint? How did you handle peer pressure? These are just a few of the challenges that your child faces every day in their young lives. How did you know what the right choice was? Prevention First is a nonprofit agency in Monmouth County that offers educational programs dedicated to strengthening the foundation of our children's lives.
Welcome back to Outlook Monmouth. I'm your host, Armen McOmber. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the redevelopment of Fort Monmouth. We have with us today two representatives from the Fort Monmouth Revitalization Planning Authority. Frank Cosentino serves as the authority's executive director, and Rick Harrison serves as deputy director. Welcome back to Outlook Monmouth. So, Mr. Cosentino, maybe give us an idea of an overview of what the future has in store for Fort Monmouth. Detail the plan, if you could.
Sure. Well, the plan had to address a number of critical issues. Certainly the jobs, as we've talked about. It had to address and understand the transportation and traffic impacts of a redevelopment of this size. It had to address the potential infrastructure impacts on the communities and the fiscal impacts that might be in store for these communities. And it also, we wanted it to address the creation of open space for the public at large to utilize. So we set about to address all of these things. These were the questions that we asked ourselves. How can we address all of these things? And with the assistance of our consultants, we created a plan that flows from West Tinton Falls to the east, all the way to Oceanport, that addressed the needs of each of these communities by working with their planners in each community to ensure that there was a flow from what existed into what will exist. And what will exist, hopefully, will be the creation of a mixture of homes, no McMansions. That's not a part of this plan at all, but affordable homes.
And I'm glad you said that, because again, you do hear a rumor that the whole thing
Sure.
will be conveyed to a large developer who will put up
That is not the
large
case.
large single-family homes.
We are working with each of the communities again on zoning, the appropriate zoning for the properties that will go to these communities, and so what we wanted was the proper mix of commercial and retail, but in community settings with the affordable houses in the context of affordability, general economic affordability. And so that's part of it, and that theme carries all the way through. We also recognize that we had a gem of a golf course there with Gibbs Hall, which is a magnificent facility. Mm-hmm. That will remain.
Conveyed to the county, or will it be a private golf course?
No, we anticipate that it will be sold to a private owner. However, one of the things that we will insist on is that it remain available for play to the public in general, and I think that we'll be able to do that. And being a Tillinghast course, to you golfers out there, that should tell you something of the quality of this golf course.
Famous golf course
Yes.
designer.
The retail portion, which is not very, very large, will be along Route 35 in Eatontown, which is the appropriate location for that, and in the form of a lifestyle center. And as we move further east, again, there's a mixture of community and recreation, which all goes to the theme that we wanted to create, to work, to live, and to recreate in this 1,126 acre parcel.
And there's one other overlay to this plan, which was a challenge that we wanted to address, and that is how to maintain and honor the history of the place.
Yes.
And the people that serve there.
Great.
And as a result, we will be nominating the historic district to go into the National Historic Registry.
And that's the sort of the central area, Oceanport, Eatontown.
The main post area off of Oceanport Avenue. It's been said actually by the mayor of Oceanport that he would like to drive down Oceanport Avenue 30 years from now and look into that main post area and have it look the same as it does today. And that's the way we built our plan.
So the main parade ground will be preserved and all of the historic structures will be preserved?
Yeah, that's a designated historic district. The state of New Jersey State Historic Preservation Office just signed a programmatic agreement with the Army on all the guidelines for how they're going to maintain that historic district and how we're going to treat those buildings within the district.
Would they still be reused, or would they be museums? Or?
Oh, they'll definitely be reused. In fact, the housing over there we consider to be market rate housing.
Right.
The Army has done a magnificent job at maintaining those buildings. I myself would move into one of those homes. They've got beautiful hardwood floors, fireplaces, They've been very well maintained, and they're nice-looking buildings.
Armen, I think it's important to note here that that my comment about open space for the public, I think, is reflected in this plan because there's in excess of 500 acres of open space out of 1,126.
That's great.
Yes.
And that will be, does that include Gibbs Hall, the golf course?
It includes the golf course, yes.
And what other areas?
Well, there are large tracts of open space along the waterways and green belt areas have been created with walking paths, with biking paths, etc. And so I think we spent a great deal of time with our consultant ensuring that the public would have access to this, what I consider to be really a quite lovely piece of property.
So they won't just put housing along the waterfront there or marina?
No, on the contrary. There is not very much housing in proximity to the waterways at all. In fact, what we've created are walkways along those waterways to open it up.
You hear things about perhaps changing road configurations or perhaps adding railroad stops or stations and reconfiguring that. Has there been any change in that department?
Well, certainly a redevelopment of this nature is going to introduce a certain amount of traffic. And we've taken steps in our plan to mitigate that traffic, both locally and outreaching as we go forward. Public transportation, creating nodes of public transportation is an essential part of this redevelopment. And I think it would be woefully lacking without public transportation. We will continue to work towards bringing the appropriate public transportation to this redevelopment.
You've also heard, or I've heard, that there's a possibility that for some towns like Eatontown that don't really have a municipal, a center or a town center type environment, that maybe that's something that could be developed. So for Tinton Falls or for Eatontown or Oceanport, for a true town center, a municipal center. Is that something that's in the plan?
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, each of the communities has indicated a desire to create a town center. Certainly Eatontown already has one, but their building is somewhat limited in size, and so they're looking to the facilities that may be available to them on the fort proper. Oceanport, again, they are interested in creating a new municipal center within the fort boundaries, whereas Tinton Falls has a brand new municipal building. It lent itself to the redevelopment because what the plan reflects, and I hope people will go to our website, which by the way is www.nj.gov/FMERPA, which is our acronym. You will see in there that we've extended the development out in a horseshoe shape coming out of the municipal building and created a downtown area in effect. So yes, your comment is very accurate.
Mr. Harrison, how do we keep jobs and how do we create new jobs in Fort Monmouth? It seems like an extremely difficult task. You have this engine of economic activity, Fort Monmouth, that's closing. Where do we find these 5,000 high-tech jobs, or how do we retain them?
Number of components to that answer. We believe we're going to make this a special place. It's going to be branded. It's going to have a theme. Frank already mentioned live, work, play. We're embarking on a serious effort for what we're calling tenant attraction and tenant development. And we will be outreaching globally to find companies that might be interested in coming here. And it's different than just moving into a building, say, on Industrial Way. Companies are looking for, the most critical asset is an intelligent workforce. And we believe that the folks that are going to be left behind, not moving to Aberdeen, represent that intelligent workforce that companies are going to be looking for to get their hands on. Second of all, they look for places where they can bring people in who can live in close proximity, not have to worry about jumping in a car to go to work. Those people are going to be looking to have entertainment and recreation available to them locally. We're going to package that all into this, and it is packaged into this redevelopment. Certainly, it's not going to be an easy job, but that's a major function that we're embarking on very heavily in the upcoming months.
I take it the economy's improving would help your chances.
Most certainly. And one other critical thing here, there are a lot of very special facilities existing there at the
That's
fort.
true.
Some very special facilities that would cost a lot of money for a company to go out and retrofit a building for or build new. For example, the McAfee Center is about 15 years old. It's a state-of-the-art building. It contains 2 anechoic chambers. One of them is large enough to bring in a Black Hawk helicopter or a tank.
I have no idea what that is.
Anechoic, it's anechoic, echo. What it does, it shuts out any frequency of spectrum from going in or out
So a private,
of the chamber.
private contractor, somebody could have a use for a chamber like that.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting, to piggyback what Rick said, is we've been contacted by a number of companies that are interested, want to be kept abreast of our progress, and we are in touch with these people, and will continue to foster a potential transfer of their business here. So it's not like we're starting from scratch.
So there's been interest shown.
Oh, absolutely. There's interest shown. There's been interest shown in the golf course, et cetera. Now, there's a bit of distance between the cup and the lip here, but we're on the case.
To wrap up, give me some idea about timelines. I mean, this is a 20-year plan.
Yes.
We know the fort's closing in 2011, and that most of the jobs will have, to the extent they're not retained here or something else doesn't intervene, they're leaving. When do you think this plan will start to be implemented?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the prospect of the negotiations that come up very, very soon. As we're formed into an implementation authority in the coming weeks, we will, as I said, formulate our strategies to discuss with the federal government. Once the property starts to dispose, in other words, the disposition takes place, then we're in a position really to start talking with prospective developers and with prospective tenants. So I do think that you'll start to see some activity the latter part of this year and will flow through. We don't have to wait until September of 2011 to start what we need to do.
Well, I want to thank you both. You have a very difficult job. I know you're doing it well, and I know everyone in the county wishes you well in what you're doing. So that's all the time we have for this episode. I'd like to thank our guests for this informative discussion. Join us next time for Outlook Monmouth, and thank you both very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.